They came with maps, guns, and arrogance, expecting an easy conquest. What they got was the most humiliating defeat in colonial history. In 1896, Italy declared Ethiopia a protectorate through the Treaty of Wuchale, but Ethiopia refused to bow. What followed at the Battle of Adwa wasn't just a resistance to European colonization. It shattered the myth of European invincibility. The Italians thought they could rewrite Ethiopia's future, but Ethiopia had other plans. With the Deceptive Treaty in one hand and rifles in the other, Italy marched in confidently expecting surrender. Instead, they met an empire ready, united, and unshakably proud. What happened next didn't just make headlines. It made history. This is the untold story of how Ethiopia turned the tide, humiliated a European power, and became a symbol of African resistance for generations to come. But how did a single mistranslated document ignite one of history's most significant battles? It began with a signature on the 2nd of May, 1889. The Treaty of Wuchale was meant to establish peaceful relations between Ethiopia and Italy, but hidden within its pages was a dangerous difference that would change African history forever. On the surface, the treaty seemed straightforward. Italy recognized its own Eritrean holding, while promising arms and support to Ethiopia. Both sides signed the document, but there was one critical problem. They weren't actually agreeing to the same terms. In the Amharic version of the treaty, Article 17 stated that Emperor Menelik II could use Italy for foreign affairs if he wanted to. A helpful option, but nothing more. In the Italian version, however, it claimed Ethiopia was now required to conduct all foreign relations through Italy, effectively making the ancient kingdom an Italian protectorate. This single mistranslation was the difference between independence and colonization. Emperor Menelik II discovered this deception when European powers began treating Ethiopia as Italian territory. Ambassadors from France and Britain started dealing with Italy instead of directly with Ethiopia. Letters meant for him were being redirected to Italian officials. The truth became clear. Italy had engineered a diplomatic trap. This was no accident. Italy was steadily expanding its colonial empire in Africa. They had already taken Eritrea to Ethiopia's north and parts of Somalia to the east. Ethiopia, with its rich resources and strategic position, was next on their list. The Italians thought their treaty manipulation would give them Ethiopia without firing a single shot. What they didn't count on was Emperor Menelik II himself, a direct descendant of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. According to Ethiopian tradition, Menelik was no ordinary ruler. When he discovered Italy's deception, his response was clear and firm. In 1893, he formally rejected the treaty, refusing to accept this manipulation of his nation's independence. Standing beside him was Empress Taytu Betul, a powerful force in Ethiopian politics and a fierce opponent of European expansion. When Italian negotiators pressed their claims on Ethiopian territory, she didn't mince words. "I would rather die than surrender my country," she told them directly. The Italians were shocked by her boldness, but they should have taken her warning seriously. As tensions grew between the nations, Menelik launched a diplomatic campaign in Europe. He understood that European public opinion could influence Italy's actions, so he enlisted sympathetic Europeans to portray Ethiopia as a Christian mountain kingdom with its own ancient culture and history worthy of respect. This clever framing helped counter Italian propaganda that portrayed Africans as uncivilized people in need of European rule. The Deceptive Treaty of Wuchale became the spark that would ignite Africa's most decisive stand against European colonization. Italy, embarrassed by Menelik's rejection and convinced of their military superiority, began preparing for war. They believed their modern weapons and European tactics would quickly overcome any African resistance. Meanwhile, in the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa, Emperor Menelik and Empress Taytu were gathering their forces. Regional kings and chiefs from across Ethiopia answered Menelik's call to defend their homeland. Warriors from different ethnic groups, who sometimes fought against each other, now united against a common enemy. While Italian diplomats reported back to Rome that Ethiopia was divided and weak, the opposite was happening. The Italians prepared for what they thought would be an easy conquest, a simple military parade into Ethiopia, followed by a quick surrender. They expected African tribesmen with spears and shields, not the force that was actually assembling. Ethiopia was quietly preparing something else entirely, a modern army equipped with the latest European rifles, led by experienced commanders who knew the terrain better than any invader could. By 1895, Italy had grown impatient with Ethiopia's defiance and prepared for battle. What they couldn't imagine was how an African nation could possibly stand against a modern European army. The mistranslated treaty that was meant to subjugate a nation had instead awakened a sleeping giant, and that giant was ready to fight. How did Ethiopia assemble an army of over 70,000 to face Italy's experienced forces? At a time when European powers were carving up Africa like a birthday cake, Ethiopia was preparing for the impossible. Emperor Menelik II understood something fundamental. Independence required more than courage. It required guns. Lots of them. The late 19th century was the height of the scramble for Africa. European nations claimed territory with treaties, and when those failed, with bullets. Menelik watched as neighboring African kingdoms fell one by one to colonial powers, but he refused to let Ethiopia suffer the same fate. Italy thought they had a perfect strategy to keep Ethiopia weak. They controlled Eritrea to the north, effectively blocking Ethiopia's easiest access to the sea. Any weapons Ethiopia wanted to import would need to pass through Italian territory. The Italians simply closed this route, believing they could keep Ethiopia trapped with outdated weapons and vulnerable to invasion. What Italy didn't know was that Menelik was playing a clever game of deception. He spread false reports about his military readiness throughout the region. Italian spies returned to their commanders with reports that Ethiopia was divided, poorly armed and unprepared for modern warfare. Some reports claimed tribal leaders wouldn't support the emperor, while others suggested Ethiopians only had spears and outdated muskets. Behind this smokescreen, something remarkable was happening. Ethiopia was purchasing thousands of modern rifles through alternative routes. French and Russian merchants delivered shiploads of the latest weapons through neighboring ports, beyond Italian control. Some reports suggest Ethiopia acquired as many as 100,000 modern weapons, rifles that could match anything the Italians carried. Empress Taytu Betul emerged as a crucial figure in these preparations. Using her personal wealth, which was considerable, she purchased weapons and supplies for the coming conflict. The Empress didn't just provide funding, she actively rallied regional leaders to the cause of national defense. Taytu's own brigade of 5,000 riflemen and 600 cavalry stood ready under her command. When some local leaders hesitated to commit their forces, her persuasive powers and patriotic appeals convinced them that Ethiopia's future depended on their unity. The Italians made a critical mistake in their assessment of Ethiopia. They saw the country as a collection of divided tribes that couldn't possibly work together. But Menelik achieved something extraordinary. He united Ethiopia's diverse ethnic groups against the common threat of colonization. Leaders who had sometimes been rivals now brought their warriors to join the emperor's army. The call to defend Ethiopia resonated across regional and ethnic boundaries. Men from almost all of Ethiopia's regions answered Menelik's call, creating an unprecedented united front against European aggression. The result was staggering. The Ethiopian army grew to between 73,000 and 100,000 soldiers. Italy had prepared to fight what they thought would be scattered groups of tribal warriors. Instead, they would face one of the largest armies ever assembled on the African continent. Ethiopia assembled not just a fighting force, but a modern army that could match European weapons with superior numbers and intimate knowledge of the terrain. The soldiers knew every mountain pass, every water source, and every strategic position in their homeland. They trained with their new weapons until they could handle them as well as any European soldier. As General Baratieri led his Italian forces northward in early 1896, confidence ran high among his officers. They had modern artillery, trained European soldiers, and the backing of a major European power. Their maps showed the terrain, but failed to reveal the true nature of what awaited them. Their intelligence reports described the enemy, but missed the reality of what Menelik had built. With troops united, weapons amassed, and terrain mastered, Ethiopia readied itself for an engagement Italy believed was impossible. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of colonial thinking and change the course of history. Dawn broke over the mountains of northern Ethiopia on March 1, 1896, as Italian soldiers checked their modern rifles and adjusted their uniforms. General Baratieri had finally ordered his army forward, not by choice, but under pressure. For weeks, urgent telegrams from Rome had demanded action. The Italian government wanted a quick victory to boost their colonial reputation, and patience had run out. Reluctantly, Baratieri ordered his force of roughly 15,000 to 17,000 men to advance. The plan seemed simple enough. 3 columns would move in parallel to take strategic mountain positions, with a 4th column in reserve. The Italians were confident their European military training would prevail, despite being outnumbered. But the mountains of Adwa concealed dangers their maps couldn't reveal. The Italian forces split into 4 columns that became hopelessly separated in the darkness. They marched through the night over narrow mountain tracks, their boots unsuitable for the rocky terrain. Communications between columns broke down completely. Sketched maps led Albertona's brigade up the wrong summit, right into Menelik's trap. As daylight revealed the landscape, a terrifying reality emerged for the Italians. General Albertona's brigade, which had been leading the advance, found themselves not on empty high ground as planned, but facing thousands of Ethiopian soldiers already holding the advantage of elevation. Menelik's forces looked down on them from strategic positions, ready and waiting. The Ethiopians had positioned themselves perfectly. Emperor Menelik II and his commanders had chosen the battlefield with care, using their intimate knowledge of the terrain. The Ethiopian army, vastly outnumbering the Italians with up to 100,000 soldiers, launched attacks from multiple directions. In a coordinated assault, when Menelik released his Schuan reserve of 25,000 riflemen, the Italian lines began to break. At a critical moment in the battle, Empress Taytu Betul made her presence felt. She personally led her Semian contingent of 5,000 rifles and 4 guns against the Italian right flank, turning the tide when the battle hung in balance. Her warriors crashed into the Italian positions, forcing them to fight on yet another front. The Italians hadn't expected this level of tactical coordination, much less to face forces led by the Empress herself. Italian soldiers found themselves caught in deadly crossfire. Their modern weapons offered little advantage against the overwhelming numbers and superior positioning of the Ethiopian forces. Many Ethiopian soldiers carried modern rifles purchased from Russia, the same quality as Italian weapons, but in greater numbers and with the advantage of high ground. The Italian situation deteriorated rapidly. Their inadequate supplies began to run low. Communication equipment failed them in the rough terrain. Veterans fought with dwindling hope, while newcomers panicked at the ferocity of the Ethiopian attack. What had started as a confident advance became a desperate struggle for survival. By noon, the unthinkable happened. The Italian army broke into a full retreat. They abandoned everything: artillery pieces, thousands of rifles, transport animals, supplies, and even their wounded comrades. Ethiopian warriors pursued them across the rocky landscape, turning retreat into rout. By day's end, Italy suffered over 6,000 dead and thousands captured. Ethiopian casualties, though heavy, left the army intact. The Italians had abandoned all their artillery and 11,000 rifles, along with most of their transport, highlighting the scale of their defeat. When news of the catastrophic defeat reached Europe, the reaction was shock and disbelief. Newspapers that had confidently predicted Italian victory now reported a colonial disaster. Italy's government fell into crisis, and Europe's myth of white invincibility lay shattered in the mountains of Adwa. For the first time, an African army using modern weapons and brilliant strategy had decisively defeated a European colonial power on the battlefield. The victory would echo through history, inspiring resistance movements across Africa and beyond, while forever changing how the world viewed European colonial ambitions. The battle's impact extended far beyond the battlefield. In October 1896, Italy signed the Treaty of Addis Ababa, abrogating Wuchale and confirming Ethiopian sovereignty. This wasn't just a paper victory. It marked Ethiopia as the only African nation to successfully resist European colonization during the entire scramble for Africa. Adwa became a symbol for later African nationalist movements. Embodying Pan-African pride, it proved African nations could stand against colonial powers and win. The battle inspired resistance movements for generations, showing that European dominance wasn't inevitable. Please let us know your thoughts in the comments and the great African story you would like us to cover next. If this story moved you, you know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another tale of Africa's magnificent past. This is History's Africa, where the forgotten power of the continent lives again.